and I feel like I ought to just sit down now. But I really appreciate it. And it's interesting what you pick out of my vita. Martha Stewart, where did that come? I guess that was true. I'm going to talk about cabinet level offices, and that may not be the best picture of Mr. Cowen. I have to tell you, if you have ever tried to Google photos of Mr. Cowen, I had trouble finding one where he had clothes on. So it took me a while to understand what that was all about, but Brian assures me it's high art, and I'll take his word for it. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's just delightful. In the United States, we have a high-level, cabinet-level positions called the Council of Economic Advisors. But the problem is, where's the rest of the social sciences? And what I'm here today is to propose that we need high-level, cabinet-level positions for all of the rest of the social sciences. The underlying assumption for this conference is that the social sciences improve the quality of life. And if we take it as a starting point, then really it would seem that we can conceptualize public policy as just the application of our field, of what we know as social scientists. And we can identify issues that really are relevant to public policies. You really think of this as your basic hypothesis testing class, research methods class, what it is that we teach all of our students. What is it that we do as social and behavioral scientists? The most obvious answer is we study how do people think, how do people act, how do we understand behavior. And we have amassed a huge amount of literature and research that really would be very useful, and actually most of it is ignored by public policy makers. I believe we have the ability to understand how to motivate people to learn, how to reduce crime, how to promote health, how to organize neighborhoods, how to improve decision-making, how to raise better children. I could go on and on. And I think it really is, we have not been effective in communicating what we know to people who should be using it. And I really think of this, you were teaching your basic research method course. What are the social science issues that can be addressed? We would propose policies by extrapolating from our relevant research, evaluate the policies, and use that evaluation really to direct changes in policies to achieve a certain goal. I think this is really an underlying assumption of what we do, and that we've not been very good at explaining this. We really should be applying the tools of our trade. Let's consider any of the common topics that comprise public policy. The ones that are debated in Congresses everywhere around the world, the ones that you're discussing at the kitchen table this morning when you were, when you were reading the newspaper or on television news. There are all sorts of real issues that people care about, and that we have the ability to take the tools of our trade. Where we are distinguished is in our research methods and our statistical methods to answer important contemporary problems. And we have the power to bring hard data to emotional debates. Questions. How do we restructure Social Security or some social system for the changing demographics? Some examples. What's a good way to ensure security? We have a new Office of Homeland Security. I would say the one in the U.S. actually has a fair number of social scientists who work there. I would argue that we could even have more. Are working mothers the cause of juvenile delinquency? These are just some of the topics that people discuss. Does sex education cause promiscuity? Do all the girls get prettier at closing time? Do you even know what that means? Any of you know what I'm talking about? There's an old country and western song called The Girls Get Prettier at Closing Time, and the basic idea is that with scarcity, as there are fewer people left at the end of the evening, other alternatives become more attractive. This is an empirical question, and this is one that extends beyond bar and dating behavior, but actually into all of our everyday decision making. Will No Child Left Behind achieve that goal? That is our new public policy for education in the U.S. No Child Left Behind, highly controversial in terms of what it's supposed to achieve. And the question is, we have the ability to be setting some of those goals, setting policies for education, and in fact determining if they're achieving those goals. And we are participating far less in all of those debates than we really have been. Can we? Should we? Have we? Can we? Can we, in fact, improve public policies? And I'd say absolutely we can. I think our greatest strength is in our ability to bring strength in research design and improve decision making. I read in the newspaper just the other day that Ireland has put into effect a new program that ensures universal preschool for everyone from age 3 years and 3 months up. And that was, at least according to your fine newspaper article, based on a solid body of social science research that talks about the huge benefits, economic, social, psychological, behavioral, from early childhood education. I think that is an example where it appears that in Ireland and in other places, and you were to be applauded for that. We certainly don't have universal preschool anywhere in the U.S. We're just beginning to move in that direction. And that's where sound psychological and other social research clearly has said that this is a wise investment, and at least somebody was listening. So we certainly can. Should we? Well, I'm going to argue that we should. And I realize that not everybody agrees that we should, and I have come to learn that many people violently disagree. But I think that we should. If we don't do it, who will? Who should be informing social policies? Why do we engage in our research on important social issues if we don't want that research to be used? And to quote from the conference materials, you begin with the statement, there is agreement that research should have a significant role in policy making. So I'm going to assume that we are on the same boat on this one, and that we believe that this is something that should be done. Have we? Yes, we have. There is a long history of social science research that's been used, especially to inform on politically sensitive issues. Let me give you a famous example. It's a U.S. example. Not surprisingly, U.S. examples are the ones I know best, but this is, I think, one of our most famous examples, and it has to do with the use of social science research in one of our most famous court cases, Brown versus the Board of Education. It was this, there we go. It was this research that, in fact, this political decision, this court case, that desegregated schools in the United States in 1954. It was a major court case, and psychology and other social sciences, in fact, did play a major role. About 4 years ago, psychology lost one of its greatest, and that was with the passing of Kenneth Clark, who was pictured there. Kenneth Clark was a former APA president. I say that with pride. I don't point to all of them with pride, but this is one I do. And he really had a historic role in this important legislation. Now, you may be familiar, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, because it's often used as an example of a place where the social sciences have overstepped its bounds. It's sometimes, if you look at some of the books, it's used in a very negative way, where the claim is that we've had our own political biases overstepped our data. And exactly what happened in that court case, remember this was the early 1950s, so this was, this was really early on in the history of the social sciences. And there was a series of studies that Kenneth Clark did with his wife, Mamie Clark, that involved giving African American and white children different dolls that were black or white, and asking them which doll they preferred. I don't know if you're familiar, these are sort of classic studies in U.S. psychology. And overwhelmingly, the white children and the African American children preferred the white dolls. And this study talked about the self-esteem of African American and white children and their preferences for different races and feelings of inferiority among African Americans. This experiment was in fact quoted in the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And a number of people have been highly critical. They said this was an example of social science overstepping its bounds. There was nothing in that study that says desegregating schools is any way going to affect the self-esteem of children, and that it was really a politicized decision. But actually, if you go back and look at what happened, it was far more nuanced than that. 32 social scientists signed a petition that was sent to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in that petition, they outlined not just that study, which was actually a small part of it, but they outlined an entire body of research evidence that said African American children and white children, in fact, can learn and do learn at the same rates. So indeed, if you look at the achievement of African American children and white children in 1954, there were huge gaps in achievement. But it wasn't because of learning ability, it was because of a whole series of schooling options and discriminatory practices. And what often comes out is the citation to this one particular study. But 32 social scientists stepped up to the plate, took on a very controversial topic, and made a very compelling argument for the damage of government-sanctioned segregated education. So despite the fact that it has sort of negative coverage and is often used as an example where we use our own biases instead of our own science, in fact, that's not what happened. And we had apparently a tremendous effect. Hard for me to even explain to you what an effect that court decision had. It literally changed the world for much of America in 1954. It meant that African Americans who could only sit in the balcony of the movies could now move down. It meant that children were going to go to school together. It meant decades of racial unrest as we moved toward integration. But it was really social science that at the heart of it is what convinced the Supreme Court justices into changing a major law. That was just one famous example, and I want to bring it up because it's often used in a very negative way, and that's just a misunderstanding of what happened. I like to think of the social sciences as sort of building a bridge over troubled waters. The idea is that we have social problems. You can name your own. We could easily go around the room and each have our own. It could be a distressingly low high school graduation rate. It could be the number of people without health insurance in the U.S. These are major problems. There's lots of them. We have the ability, we have to generate data, and we can talk about cost effectiveness of ways to solve these problems. And then public policies would use these data as a bridge over the troubled problems. At least, ideally, that's the way it should work. Unfortunately, it, for the most part, doesn't work that way. Public policies, at their broadest level, are really made by politicians. And even though I have talked to many political groups, I've addressed U.S. Congress in four occasions, and I think we're all speaking English, we come away with very little shared meaning. You think you said one thing, but you're not so sure that people heard what you think you said. It made me think of the Tower of Babel and the story that we're like the mere mortals who are attempting to build a tower that's going to reach up to the heavens. But according to the story, God confused the builders by giving them each their own language so they couldn't communicate and complete the project. And it really seems as though sometimes we are talking different languages. Let me give you a recent case study. I couldn't make up this stuff. It is almost too funny and too rich. I wouldn't be quite that creative. We're going to begin with an example, and the example is a recent one, just passed, addressed to the U.S. House of Representatives, and it was under Brian Baird. Brian Baird is a psychologist. He is a representative from the state of Washington, someone whom I've met on a number of occasions, and he is, functioning in U.S. Congress. We begin with the basic assumption that we have grand challenges. Climate change is a grand challenge. National security, healthcare, energy, the environment, a whole range of grand challenges where the people in this room have the ability to, in fact, suggest viable solutions and, in fact, have ways to say that we can test various programs and suggest various research designs. Brian Baird is on the Energy Commission. It's a major issue in the U.S. as it is in many places around the world. And he's quoted as saying, "The social sciences have more immediate relevance to America's problems than any of the other sciences." And as an example, I would like you to consider testimony that was provided to the U.S. House Committee on Science and Technology regarding the contributions of the social sciences to the energy challenge. The idea is that every day, millions of people are making decisions about the use of energy. From the kind of car they're going to purchase, to whether to take public transportation, what temperature to put your thermostat at, is it worth buying an energy-saving appliance? I mean, everyone is countless energy-relevant decisions. And in fact, most of the testimony and most of the debate in Congress has to do with technologies. But in fact, what we don't talk enough about is human behavior. I mean, if we want to understand technologies, we have to understand the people who use them. So while there's countless discussions about energy-saving technologies, there's almost no discussion about how to understand and how to change the behavior that's really going to make a big dent in our energy challenges. So as part of that presentation that was arranged, not surprisingly by one of the few psychologists in Congress, you may be familiar with the work of Robert Cialdini, a well-known social scientist in the United States. He went and he made a presentation about socially relevant research on the issues of energy consumption. And he talked about a couple different studies that he had. In one of the studies that they did, they had 4 different conditions. And in fact, people were given, in this particular study, you would get your electricity bill. And on your electricity bill, it would have one of 4 messages, along with what you owe the electric company and how much you used. One is, save energy, it'll save you money. Another condition was, it's important to save energy because we want to save our natural resources. The third one is, it's important to save energy because it's the socially responsible thing to do. Another message was, it's important to save energy. Your neighbors are saving energy. And the last one, there are 5 conditions. It says 4, but there's really 5. They save energy, no reason at all. 4 of them had reasons attached to them. So we first asked people, which did you think would be the most effective measure in actually getting people to cut energy consumption? Well, nobody believed that D would be effective, but it turns out that the only message that led to a significant reduction in future energy use was the one that said, your neighbors are saving energy, and we want you to do this too. That knowing what your neighbors are doing, that social, knowing what other people like you are doing was going to affect your behavior. No one believed that they care what their neighbors are doing, but yet that was the only message that was very successful in leading a subsequent reduction in energy consumption. People were fooling themselves in saying it wouldn't matter. In fact, it turns out a great deal that we need to know what other people are doing because, in fact, there is a very strong behavioral tendency to act like others. while completely denying the fact that that's something that we want to be doing. Well, here's another similar kind of research. Do you reuse your towels when you stay multiple nights at a hotel? You know, you've all checked into a hotel, and you see now little placards that say, save water, save energy, reuse your towels. Well, I don't know. Am I a person who reuses my towel? I never thought about this before. I don't have any standards. Growing up, no one told me, do I reuse my towels when I'm at a hotel? I have no idea if I reuse my towel. Would it matter if you were told that, in fact, a majority of guests do? And if I asked you that question, every one of you would say no. I don't care what other people do, because I think for myself. I don't, it doesn't matter. So in fact, in a similar sort of research design, people had various messages. And the message in the hotel rooms varied. Reuse your towel, save the environment. Help save the environment for future generations. Partner with us to save the environment. Or join your fellow citizens in saving the environment, and something that gets the idea across that most people, in fact, will reuse their towels. Well, you could probably guess by now what turned out to be the only effective message, and that was there was a towel reuse was increased by 34% only when people were told that the majority of people reuse their towels. Oh, so that's what people do. Now I have an answer to my question. Would I have believed that would affect our behavior? No, of course not. But in fact, it turns out that this is what it does. It seems that we know a great deal about how to get people to change their behaviors without, in fact, their knowledge, necessarily. It isn't like I'm lying to you. I'm asking you to reuse it, but without your even knowing which one is going to be effective. And that we know a great deal, and I can give you lots of examples where this is true. These are just some of them, where most of our messages, in fact, backfire, where we say, most people are dishonest. Don't you be like that. In fact, people are more likely to be dishonest under those sorts of messages. And so we know a great deal about human behavior. So having made a number of these presentations, and with the help of a number of people who are prominent, we now have a new House of Representatives bill. This is a copy of 3247. And what it does, it established a social and behavioral sciences research program at the Department of Energy. And it has a charge. This bill just passed on July 17th, 2009, and the purpose is to identify and to understand social and behavioral factors that influence energy consumption, and the exception on the adoption of new kinds of energy technologies. There's an opening for a director, and if you're looking for a job, there's an opening for a director to develop a research plan and to provide energy consumption information to consumers. So you may be thinking, way to go. Hey, good job. Well, not exactly. You may be that so far so good, and I agree, but I would not say that this has been uniformly embraced by members of Congress. Kay Bailey Hutchinson, who is very powerful in Congress, in fact, if you go to her website, she is a representative from the state of Texas. She is running for an open Senate seat, and in fact, she is planning to run for U.S. President. So if they're collecting funding now for U.S. Senate presidency race, she has completely opposed to National Science Foundation funding for social and behavioral research, and in fact, she has completely opposed this House bill that establishes a social and science program and speaks out in no uncertain terms about how worthless everything we do is. Senator Coburn, these are all real people, no names have been changed to protect the innocent. These are people who object to funding of political science research at any level because, quote, it is socially useless and it is not science. And in fact, when you poll people and you want to listen to people's opinions on these topics, there are many legislators, many people in high-level public policy positions who completely misunderstand social science research. I have a short video clip. We had a little trouble getting this to play, but I'll get it up in a minute. This is a video clip. Was here a minute ago. Where's my video clip? This is where Valerie comes up and comes and saves us. I'll show you the video clip, which is this. It seems to have disappeared. Where is it? It's not. There we go. Okay, all right, here we go. Stop it. Okay, full. Oh, stop. Let's stop it. Okay, thank you. There we go. She had to click the right spot. Okay, don't go anywhere. She promised she would stand next to me and hold my hand throughout the whole thing. The video clip. This is a video clip from Fox TV News. If you're familiar with Fox News, yeah, some of you are nodding your heads. When I was living in China, I was there last year for half a year. It was the only English language TV program I could get. And sometimes I was torn between putting on the Chinese I could not understand a word of or Fox News. It is a national news program, and it is the one that President Obama has recently taken on as being opposed to many of his sorts of policies. I'm not quite sure how to say this. So they're really at war with each other. It is a major television network. I have here a 7-minute clip where they talk about the new Energy Commission, and indeed one of our state representatives from my home state of California, I'm so embarrassed to say, has some comments about it. I think you'll enjoy their comments on their understanding of what we do in social and behavioral research.
We're going to be excited to know that the government is here.
Can you hear?
One of the biggest scientific experiments ever. You get to be a part of it. It's called H.R. 3247. It's a bill proposed by Congressman Brian Baird. It seeks to, and I quote, establish social and behavioral science research programs. They would seek to identify and understand the social and behavioral factors that influence energy consumption, to promote the utilization of the results of social and behavioral research to improve the design, development, and demonstration and application of energy technologies, policies, and programs. Oh, this is fantastic. Remember the book 1984? Sure, it's nothing like that. Really, this is completely different. There will also be a director of social and behavioral research. Oh, man. I doubt it would be, like anybody with crazy beliefs, like any others are. This one's going to be totally just like you. They're going to study us and find ways to essentially trick us into driving crappy hybrids.
That's my favorite line.
As he summarized on April 2nd, quote, President Obama is still relying on behavioral science, but now his administration is using it to try to transform the country. They didn't say this like it was a bad thing either. Because when you know what makes people tick, it's a lot easier to help them change. Well, that doesn't sound creepy at all. It doesn't. And interestingly enough, it doesn't sound very American either. But what is that now that we're in a global community? And has that ever stopped Barack Obama before? I mean, hey, if it's for the betterment of the collective, you know what I'm saying? Joining me now is Congressman Dana Walker of California. Congressman?
That is my congressman.
We're actually really fighting against this bill yesterday. What in crazy town, aka Washington, is going on?
Well, this exemplifies something that has been happening underneath the surface. Wherever you get someone as honest as Brian Baird, and as sincere as he is, explaining the real purpose behind his bill, which is behavior modification. So he wants to set up a behavior modification czar at the Department of Energy. We Republicans feel government is supposed to be controlled by the people, and obviously the frame of mind that comes from this bill is the government should control the people.
Well, I'm just thinking, Congressman, some might say this sounds like, I don't know, propaganda.
Well, that's exactly
making fun of.
They believe that people just aren't doing the right things because they're not making choices that these liberal leftists want them to make. And thus, there must be something wrong with them. Sure, let's psychoanalyze them. This is as arrogant as it comes. I will tell you, and Brian is a very nice guy. He's well-intended, but you know, the people will put us on the road with all good intentions. They can put us on the road. Do you know where?
I'm going to say it. Hell. The word, one of the two. With this one, this is what Representative Barrett said. He said, quote, "We are not only going to unleash psychiatrists on you, it's going to be anthropologists and economists and psychologists. This is vicious, freedom-grabbing, mind control at its most pernicious, and I think we should desperately hide in fear, because without a doubt, the Martians and the communists are right behind."
The anthropologists and then the Martians.
Research is far and propaganda folly.
Well, the trouble with this debate was, and by the way, that it was passed by party line vote. All of the Democrats voted for it, all the Republicans voted against it. But you can't tell whether they're being facetious or not. You have some people that are making arguments of, well, we have to tell our children when to turn the lights on and off. But you know, what you read out of the article was, you don't treat the American people like children. Children shouldn't have all the rights and make independent decisions. And adults in this country don't deserve to be sent to a psychiatrist if they disagree with some little liberal guru.
Okay, thank you very much, Congressman. You keep up the good fight. Now listen, this is what Obama said back in 2008. Lately, he's going to be a socialist for wanting to roll back the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans so we can finally get tax relief to the middle class. I don't know what's next. By the end of the week, you'll be accusing him of being a secret communist. That was Barack Obama. Can we just show the Newsweek cover here real quick? He's calling me a socialist. Do you remember the Newsweek cover? We're all socialists now? Oh, yes. So, yeah, you keep mocking. Because obviously all of these things are great on this. We're going to be excited to know that we're not doing that.
Okay. I think that sort of made my point. Let me get back to where I was. 1 second. There we go. The idea that, you know, I think I explained it well. And you think you said one thing, but, you know, first, you know, he doesn't mean psychiatrists, of course. He means psychologists. And then you're going to have anthropologists and economists. And then, you know, the next step is just the Martians. I can certainly understand, you know, where this is. My favorite line of all was, against our will, they're going to make us drive puny hybrids. And the idea being that the data, the testimony, that in fact our behavior is influenced in many ways by things that we are not aware of, like the fact that I can get you to save energy by telling you your neighbors save energy, is very frightening to people. And in fact, the whole idea is that we have this scary stuff. That would be the work that you're doing, that you understand behavior, that in fact you can control behavior, and this is very frightening to some people. The spin that we are advocating mind control, and there is considerable amount written about this in response to the new social and behavioral science program at the Department of Energy, really, I think, speaks far better than I could have, where I said, I think I've said one thing, and I walk away, and they have understood and heard something entirely different. What's interesting in their argument is social science is useless because it only tells us what we already know, and social science is frightening because it's going to lead to 1984 type of mind control. I mean, the evidence is clear. How information is communicated, how we create economic incentives, how they're structured, how technology is explained and introduced to users matter a great deal. I mean, the evidence is abundantly clear. The problem then comes in, as social scientists, coming away and explaining to people that this is something in the public good. And you could see from the mocking tone, he said everything I said, but with a much better sneer, and in a way that I could hardly have communicated. So I think that this is certainly an interesting way of thinking about it. As I mentioned, I've been to Congress on several occasions, and let me tell you a little bit about my testimony before the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Science. So these are the people in the U.S. House of Representatives who are concerned with U.S. science policy. I have been well prepared. I was completely planned, as you might guess. I knew I had exactly a certain amount of time to speak, and I had my points very carefully made. I was going to talk about human cognition as an empirical science that had a theoretical basis. I wanted to talk about the use of this theoretical basis, what we call the science of learning, in education reform, talk about the schism between those who do laboratory work and the applied practitioners, and a way of really bridging that gap, and really make the pitch that I wanted to apply the science of learning to wed these two traditions. And in fact, I talk a little bit about the underachievement in education, the need for a skilled workforce. I had some really, I thought, moving prose that I pulled out of a 1983 report called A Nation at Risk. I had tables ready, I had my data prepared, I followed all the rules for data presentation, not to, to get it right. And as we're walking to go to Congress, and this was, somewhat of a scary thing. You're walking down marble halls, and your sort of shoes are click-clacking as you go along. And I had an administrative aide with me, and as we're walking along, she's sort of preparing me for my presentation. So, she tells me, don't make the mistake, don't give them too much data. The numbers confuse them, and they get bored. This is great. Here I am, on my way to talk to the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Science. So just give them a little data, not too much data, because they're going to be upset by numbers. And I'm thinking, surely she's kidding me. She wasn't kidding me. That in fact, I wanted to show them how the data support research findings, and, wouldn't it be insulting to talk to the highest body in the U.S. Congress, elected officials who are guardians of natural science, and not give them too much data? She said, no, don't do that. Instead, can you tell them some anecdotes? Can you tell them about someone you know who used this approach and then got really better? So I'm thinking, she wants me to tell them a story. And there's me rocking U.S. Congress, come hop on my lap, it's story time. And certainly, I know we all like stories. They make abstract concepts come alive. They give flesh to colorless data. You're going to realize I started with a story about my trip to Congress to make this come alive. I certainly know a single vivid example can outweigh a huge body of data collected from a random sample from a population. But I also know that anecdotes are not science, that they are based on a sample size of one. They have all the biases of selection and memory and being atypical. So I was wondering, maybe I could start out with, once upon a time, I had some data. But I realized that wasn't going to capture what she had in mind. Certainly, there are all kinds of stories that are extremely powerful. I can tell you one where for years the American Psychological Association had lobbied for Congress for increased funding for college counseling centers, for mental health centers on college campuses. And, but asking for a huge amount of money, a big increase for these counseling centers. We had an effective lobby. Needless to say, we had enough data to sink a vote. So what happened? Unfortunately, sadly, the son of a congressman committed suicide. And that single tragic example got us more funding than we would have ever expected to get. Despite all of our data on those faceless, nameless people who across the country had committed suicide. But there was one face, one name, and they did it in this person's name whom they knew. And all of our data never would have moved them in the same way that a single personal example does. So there is no doubt that we need to be aware how to communicate even when it violates everything we know about science. We know that most people prefer to base their decisions on stories about people they know than about a bunch of strangers. So you, in fact, we think, I got a random sample of the population of interest. Well, the response literally is, who cares about them? You should have asked the people I know. Everything that we hold dear in our science is in fact rejected by policymakers, by real people. And in fact, these do not come naturally to most people. I've taught stat and research methods a lot of years, as I'm guessing many of you have. And I can say these concepts are not intuitive. And unless they're deliberately taught in ways that transfer, the general public does not see the value in things that we consider to be of the highest value in our science. I learned that political philosophy is often stronger than science, and that often we deal in social sciences with hot topics. Topics that are too hot for politicians to handle, and certainly topics where data are less useful than one's personal beliefs. Evolution. We have Sarah Palin, for example, who will probably be maybe running for president in the future, certainly has run for be a heartbeat away from the president, who does not believe in a basic scientific principle of evolution. Global warming. Many people do not believe that there is a problem with global warming. Child care policies, I could go on and on. Obesity is a major problem in much of the developing world, and it's a huge problem in the United States. HIV/AIDS. HIV/AIDS means I need to understand sexual behavior and illicit drug use. Those are topics that are too hot to handle for many politicians. Same-sex marriage. If you ever want a long story, I'll tell you some of my misadventures as president of APA. The year I was president, we came out with a policy statement, data-based of course, in support of same-sex marriage. It has not been, and as the spokesperson, I was the target of so many distressing phone messages, phone threats, and email threats that we've had to save the emails in case they find the body somewhere. These are not issues where people are open to even considering a body of data. People believe they already know the answers to these questions and are willing to only accept the data that we give them that's in support of what we call personal belief systems. If given data that doesn't support my personal belief system, it is kinds of dissonance results, and it is far easier for me to say the data are flawed, you are biased, and so forth, than when the data affect what I have to say. Let me give you a brief another example. I'm involved now in at least two major court cases involving single-sex education in the United States. Prior to 2006, it had not been legal under our Title IX to have publicly funded single-sex education. So that, in fact, this is all based on the notion that there are some researchers who claim that male and female brains are so different that girls and boys have to be taught separately. They make claims about that girls need to have a softer tone of voice. So for those of you in the audience who are women, I should be sounding like I'm screaming. And those of you who are men, I'm not talking loud enough according to this line of research. Women need dimmer room lighting than the boys need. and so forth. Now, what does the evidence? Well, we have a number of major meta-analyses on this. The evidence that separating this makes a positive difference is the question, and the conclusion is the evidence is undeniably inadequate. We have non-profit organizations whose goal it is to synthesize evidence on social and behavioral interventions and public policies. One of these is the Campbell Collaboration, to help guide decision-making on topics like criminal justice, social welfare, and education. What have they concluded? In two separate papers, the conclusion was the paradox is the beliefs are so strong and the evidence is weak. I can go on and on with the data. I have amassed a huge amount of data since I am providing testimony in two major cases on this issue. Perhaps the strongest testimony, the strongest data, the U.S. Department of Education commissioned an independent review on the topic. The independent review did a major meta-analysis and in fact concluded that there are no benefits and in fact there are a number of negative outcomes. So how did the U.S. Department of Education use those data? They ignored the own data that in fact they commissioned of independent experts and went ahead and announced more choices in single-sex education. The reason for this is highly political. I could go into some of the politics, and this was under our former Secretary of Education. It has not been reversed by our current Secretary of Education, but it was clear that they knew the answers in advance of the data collection. They paid for their own expensive data collection, and a very eminent board of social scientists who did the research, top people, and in fact chose to completely ignore it. So if we're talking about using our research to affect public policy, I think it's important that we understand what it is that we're up against. One of the ideas is that we don't need evidence if you have experience and good intentions. So who are the real experts? Well, they would rather listen to a single teacher who came in and says, you know, I've been teaching 20-some years, I care deeply about my children, and this works. And you can bring in a meta-analysis, literally, of thousands of studies done on random samples of people. Who cares about that? That shows statistical significance. Real people don't care about that. You can drown them with effect sizes because it won't matter, they're not listening if they already know the answers. The experts are not us. Experience alone is not enough. We know that, in fact, being a wonderful teacher for 20 years doesn't mean that you know what works and what doesn't work, and that these are very difficult challenges that we're up against. But I don't mean this to be a pessimistic talk. In fact, I'm quite optimistic. I teach critical thinking and have for many years, and there's a large evidence that says we can teach people how to think better. We can teach people the value of having disinterested analyses of data as for public policies. We can teach people that anecdotes are not good evidence. We can teach people that to recognize their own preferences for certain kinds of outcomes. But it's not easy. But it is something that can be done if united people say that this is one of the most important things we can do, the most important parts of a college education. I've come to learn that no matter how strong the data are, someone is going to say, well, that's just your opinion. And they have to understand the difference between a preference that is not, an opinion is a preference that doesn't require evidence. I like chocolate ice cream better than vanilla. That's my preference. That's different from a fair review of evidence that supports or fails to support a conclusion. And then they'll say, well, science is never value-free. Absolutely correct. Science is never value-free. And that's where social scientists are often brought to task. And the whole notion of the politicization of science is used to describe the misuse of science with a particular agenda. But science, social science, is the best tool we have. It is the most unbiased way we have that is self-correcting across multiple studies. And while this, in some sense, is my religion, my belief system, I think it's one that can, with a our ability to talk to people and convey these messages. Science proceeds in tiny steps, and so will our influence on public policy. Public policy is often many steps behind the data, but we can be doing things better to bring them in alignment. We can present data in ways that are compatible with some existing political philosophy. I'm not suggesting that you lie, but I am suggesting that you become politically aware if you're attempting to affect public policy, and that you understand what the prevailing views are, and find if there is a way to present your data. I presented to Congress on several times about work and family, and you know what? Everybody is pro-family. As it turns out, pro-family means profoundly different things on both sides of the aisle. But if I present a pro-family message, in fact, it is one that seems to bring people together, even though it seems that they might be pulling them apart. Tell a compelling story. It won't hurt, and it will be an effective way to communicate, even if you are choking a little bit on the notion of an anecdote instead of your data. You can certainly do them both. Avoid political minefields. Avoid alienating some group that you need for support if you can. You may not be able to, but if you can, you certainly don't need to be lining up extra enemies. Present a message that is easy to understand. Often what we have to say is lost, and I'm a big fan of repeating messages as part of getting point support and making them memorable. Is there something you can capture in a short slogan? No child left behind. It sounds, geez, so true. I don't want to leave anyone behind. The fact that the program itself has many flaws is irrelevant because I can get behind not leaving a child behind. And, we can certainly be doing that sort of thing. Make it personally relevant. And in fact, we can use social science data to alter public policies. This is an example of a report that I wrote, that was chaired when I was president of APA. It went to all members of Congress and all committees and subcommittees on work and family. And it was one where we attempted to tell a story, to make the data alive, to certainly explain that there are data behind these statements that we're making, point to where the data are, but not present them so much in the document, and try to use as best I could information to convey what it was that we thought was important for people of Congress to know. And I hope that you will join with me in what I think is an extremely important endeavor, and that is really getting the work that we do used in the ways we want it to be used. And here's contact information if anybody wants to contact me. And I'd love to talk about this with you. I think we have some time.
Yes, thank
you. Am I right? Yes.
Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you.